Hey everyone, and welcome to our new webinar, ICAO Filing Made Easy. Our presenter today, Rob, has a slightly longer name for that, and I will let him introduce you to that in just a minute. But first, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items related to the GoToWebinar platform that we're using for this webinar. You can ask questions using the GoToWebinar message panel on the right. You just click that question mark button in the thought bubble, and it opens up that panel, and you can submit questions, which our staff will answer throughout the presentation, and we'll also pick out a few really good questions that we can answer at the very end live. If you're having any audio problems, we strongly recommend you join from a computer, either a desktop or a laptop computer, not from a mobile device. We tend to see more problems with audio for people joining from mobile devices. But if you are on a mobile device and you encounter some issues, you may have to go into the audio settings and fiddle with some of those to get it working. But we definitely recommend you join from a computer rather than an iPad or an iPhone. And finally, the session is being recorded and it will be accessible for later viewing at foreflight.com/onfrequency. So with that, I'll hand it over to Rob.
Good afternoon and welcome to a pilot's guide to understanding the ICAO flight plan and its codes. My name is Rob MacLeod. I'm the flight operations team leader here at ForeFlight. I'm also an aircraft dispatcher and advanced ground instructor and a commercial pilot with ratings in the Citation and Phenom type aircraft. One of the roles that we play here on the flight operations team is to monitor all of the filings that occur through ForeFlight. And we've noticed that one of the biggest drivers of errors and rejections has to do with the ICAO codes that are loaded into an aircraft. Either they're loaded incorrectly or they're incomplete, and this is resulting in errors or rejections from air traffic control. So my goal here is to equip you with the knowledge to correctly set up your aircraft for the type of operation that you're going to be flying. I think a logical place for us to start would be to look at the ICAO flight plan format. As most of you probably know, the FAA put this out last year stating that they are transitioning to the mandatory use of the International Flight Plan format, or the ICAO, for domestic and international flights. Now, the military, they still file quite often in the old NAS version, but we expect them to move into the ICAO as well. But for civilian use, the FAA is strongly advising that you transition over to the ICAO. It is still possible to file in the NAS. In fact, you can still file in the NAS in ForeFlight. It requires a couple of extra steps, but it is possible. I hope that by the end of this, that you will embrace the ICAO and see the benefits that it's going to provide to you, because you're really not gaining anything by filing in the old NAS flight plan format. So I'm going to put a little bit of a sales pitch on here for the ICAO and show you the benefits of filing in the ICAO format. I think first and foremost is the RNAV capabilities that you get for filing in the ICAO. So by filing in the ICAO format, it's going to allow you to file the RNAV SIDS and STARS. It's going to be able to file the RNAV routes, such as the low-level Tango routes and the upper-level Quebec and Yankee routes. The ICAO also supports special handling, humanitarian, hospital flights, medevacs, so on. It allows for better wake turbulence separation, and the ICAO flight plan allows you to designate what your ADSB capabilities are. So we all know that the FAA mandated that you have to have ADSB to operate in most controlled airspace now. The old NAS does not have a way for you to show what your ADSB capabilities are. The ICAO also support some of the features for the advanced users, such as pre-departure clearance, PDC, or CBDLC, etc. And the ICAO allows for an expanded search and rescue data and emergency equipment fields. Best of all, if you have your aircraft set up correctly, ICAO will generate your flight plan in the ICAO format automatically. So there's really no extra work for you. There's no need to go through the extra steps to file in the NAS. Once you have your aircraft set up correctly, you just file it as you normally would, and the ICAO will be generated for you. And let's look at the ICAO flight plan format. So on the left is the paper version of it. If you were going to hand fill out a flight plan and walk it up to the tower and file it, this would be the document that you would use. And over on the right is the AFTN version, the coded version that we would send electronically. And I know it just looks like a bunch of codes, but I'm going to break it down for you so that you can understand it. This is what ATC sees. This is what my team sees. This is what an aircraft dispatcher would be looking at when they're doing the filings. But it will make sense to you once we go through it. And this will also help explain why the correct codes are important. So here's the flight plan that we're going to start with just to go through. This is a pretty simple flight from David Wayne Hooks Airport here in Houston to Lake Charles, Louisiana. In the upper left is the header. So this is the first thing it's showing you is the type of message that it is. So it's an FPL, so it's a flight plan message as opposed to a change message or a delay or a cancellation. Next to that is the aircraft identification. So I intentionally put a call sign in there so you can see that the call sign will populate in this field as opposed to the aircraft registration. Next to that are the flight rules and the flight type. So this is going to be an IFR flight as opposed to a VFR flight. If it was a VFR flight, obviously that letter would be a V. And next to that is the type of flight. And this is a general aviation flight as opposed to a MIC code for military or an S for a scheduled operator. Below that, aircraft type. So this is going to be a Piper Arrow. And there's a slash followed by an L. And that L is my wake turbulence category. After that, I just put a long string of code in there to demonstrate where the equipment, the ICAO equipment, is going to be shown in this flight plan. So that is what all those letters mean. And we're going to go into that along with the other codes in a few minutes. After the slash is the ICAO surveillance, and that's where you designate your transponder and ADSB type. Next line is my departure airport, my departure time in Zulu, and then I have my true airspeed, my filed true airspeed and my altitude, my route, my arrival airport, my time en route of 0 hours and 59 minutes, my alternate of Lafayette, Louisiana. And down here is my PBN. My PBN codes, these are important. These are the things that really make that nice expensive equipment that's sitting up in front of you in the airplane worthwhile, because this designates what you can actually do with the equipment that you have as far as RNAV and RNP and so on and so forth goes. That's where this information shows up in the ICAO. And we'll talk about that at length later. This next area is just additional information. If I needed to add more information about navigation capabilities or surveillance capabilities, this is also where the date of flight is shown. So the date of flight, it goes year, month, day. Here's where my registration is going to be displayed as opposed to my call sign. So the registration gets put right there. And then if you have the occasion to add a remark to a flight plan, this is where it would be. In this case, I was just going to be filing a test flight plan, so you can put the word test in there, but this is where you would put ADCUS, or if you were going to say that you wanted to do a practice approach somewhere, you could put that in the remarks section. This is where it would show up on the flight plan. Below that is my endurance in hours and minutes, so 2 hours and 31 minutes of endurance, the number of people on board, and my emergency radio equipment would be E for ELT. Underneath that is the color of my airplane and my contact information. So since I filed as the pilot in command, it will show my name, my personal cell phone number, and my home base. Feel free to call that number if you want to tell me what a great job I'm doing on this webinar, but this is where that information will show up when you file it. Now, of note, the information above where I've put the little stars, this is the information that the controllers have available to them when they're handling you in the airspace. They do not have the information below the stars. So when you're talking to a controller, he does not know what the color of your airplane is. He does not know your name. He does not know your cell phone number or your home base. He has access to that information if he needs it. He would have to do what's called a request for supplemental information, or he could call ForeFlight. Generally, they only request that information if there's a possibility that you've gone overdue, or you have a no radio condition, or some sort of safety of flight information. So just be aware that when you're talking to a controller, he doesn't know your name, he doesn't know your cell phone number, but the information is there if needed. So we're going to get into the codes here for the airplanes. And I just want to stress that when we start talking about the codes of the airplane, it's really important that you understand the capabilities of the individual pieces of equipment that you have in the aircraft. Read through your documentation, find out what you really have in the airplane as far as transponder capabilities, GPS capabilities, ADSB capabilities, because there are a lot of different variations out there. There's really not really one size fits all, but you need to be sure that what you've got in the airplane is being reflected correctly on the ICAO. So let's get into the ICAO equipment and surveillance codes, or the /G was far too simple, as I like to call it. Here's a full list of the ICAO equipment codes. Please do not write this down. A majority of these codes do not apply to general aviation. Most of us are not flying around with CPDLC or some sort of Iridium communication on board. So there's really a handful that are most important for general aviation, and they work very well in the National Airspace System. So I'm going to show those to you now. So these are the common equipment codes for IFR equipped aircraft. The most important code, maybe not the most important, but the most common code is standard. And think of standard as it's like a bucket. And standard code will include your VOR Oscar code, your VHF Victor code, and your ILS Lima code, all in one code. And that's just to reduce the number of letters in the equipment string. So if you have all three of those capabilities, you can put that in the standard. And you do not need to designate each code individually. Just save yourself some time and some space on the equipment string line, and just put the Sierra in there. Now, if you have a standalone DME outside of the GPS, if you have something, panel mounted, you have a DME, put in the Delta code. Same thing with the ADF. You can add that in there. The Golf code is for GNSS or GPS, either WAS or non-WAS. And this is for a GPS that is installed. Your ForeFlight on your phone or your iPad does not count as GPS as far as aircraft equipment. It must be installed, and it must be approved for IFR for you to use this code. You need to have this code for using any of the RNAV routes if you're going to be out there flying. So you got to have this Golf code in there. The next code, the Romeo code, this is the one that gets missed most often because people don't really understand what that means, so they don't select it. But if your GPS or whatever you're using as navigation out there allows you to have RNAV capability, then you are PBN approved. So go ahead and select that, because if you don't have the Golf and the Romeo selected in the equipment codes, you will not be able to put anything into the PBN codes. And I'll explain why that's important later. But so if you are RNAV capable, select the Romeo. The Bravo code is for LPV. Most of the WAS-equipped GPS units will tell you that you can put in the Bravo code. And you can. It's just not going to enhance anything. You don't get any special treatment by ATC for having the Bravo code in there, because they're not going to assign an approach to you based on you having LPV. But it doesn't hurt anything to put it in there. So if you've got it and you want to put it in, go ahead. The Yankee code, this one is mostly important in Europe. You can't fly in most European airspace without the Yankee code. In fact, I think Denmark is one of the few places you don't have to have the 8.33 radio spacing there. So if you're a user who's flying around in Europe, be sure you have that Yankee code in there. If you're here domestically and you think you might be going to Europe, put the Yankee code in there. It's not going to hurt anything to have that code in your equipment string here in the United States. But if you don't need it, it's just one less thing to put in there. But that's what it's for. It's for the 8.33 radio spacing, because the radio frequencies over there are so congested, they just need some extra space. So that's what that is for. Next up is the surveillance. This is specifically talking about the transponder part of the surveillance codes. The surveillance code is in two pieces. It's transponder and ADSB. So obviously the old mode A, that's a pre-mode C type of transponder. If you have that, you can put that in there. But most of us are going to be flying with mode C or better capability. And Mode C is the minimum. This is what you have to have really to fly in controlled airspace here in the United States. Obviously, you need it to go into Class Bravo, Class Charlie airspace, overflying these airspaces. So Mode C is the minimum you need to have. And if you're unsure if you have additional capabilities, C will always work. If you know your Mode C and you might be Mode S, but you're not sure, go ahead and just put the C in there. It's not gonna cause you any problems to just file as a C. You just need to show that you have that minimum capability. Now, Mode S, the S code and the Echo code and the Lima code, they're all Mode S, but they have additional capabilities. So check with the documentation from your manufacturer and see what you've got in there. And if you're a Mode Echo, which is pretty common now, go ahead and plug those in. And if you don't have a transponder, you can put the November for nil in there. But I don't see a lot of that. I don't see how you'd be filing flight plans, IFR flight plans in the US with no transponder. You'd be very, very limited on where you could go. The next part of the ICAO surveillance code is the ADSB codes. Generally, the ADSB codes come in two different types. One is 1090 megahertz and the other one is a 978 megahertz, or we'll call it a UAT. The 1090 megahertz ADSB units are designated with a Bravo code, and the 978 megahertz coded ADSB units are designated with the uniform codes. One way to tell the difference is that if your ADSB is panel mounted or if it's tied in with your transponder, it's probably 1090. If you know that your ADSB unit is on the wingtip or on the tail tip, you're probably a UAT. Again, check with the manufacturer. Both types are legal. Both types work just as well, but you just need to know which one you have because it's important to ATC to know what frequency you're transmitting your ADSB information out on. Now, the numbers after the Bravo and the uniform code indicate whether you are out only or out and in. ATC really only cares if you can transmit out. If you're out and in, that's great. But they really only care if you are out. So if you are equipped with an ADSB unit that is out only and it's a 1090, you would put a Bravo 1. If you were out and in transmitting on 1090, you would be a Bravo 2. Same thing with the uniform codes. There are a couple other variations of the ADSB or same type of capability out there. One is the Victor for the VDL mode. The next one is for the Delta, future air navigation. And then you have Golf for the ADS-C. They're out there, but it's not real common in GA aircraft. So if you do think you have that, just check your documentation to ensure that you really do. All right, now we're going to get up to PBN. And this is kind of how I felt when I started trying to figure out everything there was about ICAO codes and especially the PBN codes, because some of it's just not logical and there's a lot of variations on the PBN codes and it just kind of made my head hurt. So, but PBN, what is it and why should I care? Well, the PBN code is really the end game for the equipment that you have. This really says this is what I am actually capable of doing with the equipment I have in my aircraft. And by having the correct codes in there, you're going to be able to fly into airspace and fly on routes and procedures that you couldn't possibly do without having PBN codes. So I'm just going to show you some of them here. So what is PBN? PBN means performance-based navigation. It's comprised of area navigation and required navigation performance. So RNAV and RNP. And it just describes an aircraft capability to navigate using performance standards. Here's a little cut from one of our support articles at ForeFlight that show a bunch of different PBN codes. I'm going to go through these in some detail and explain to you which codes are most likely going to be relevant for your airplane. So don't get too hung up on this chart here. One thing I do want to bring up, which I thought was kind of interesting, was as far as the RNAV codes go, and I'll explain the difference between the RNAV codes and the RNP codes in a minute. The RNAV codes are coded in such a way that the letter designates the capability. Like, for example, Charlie is an RNAV2 code. The number 2 after the Charlie indicates the source of that RNAV2, and the number 2 designates GPS. So if you see A Charlie 2, it means RNAV 2 capability provided by GPS. Now, the RNP PBN codes do not follow the same format, but the RNAV codes do. So I found that to be interesting. Here are the RNAV capabilities that you can put in your PBN code strings. Now, RNAV enables the aircraft to fly in a desired flight path within the coverage of ground or space-based navigation aids. And RNAV is set up for a specific distance off of a desired flight path with a 95% accuracy. So the first code is the Alpha 1. And the reason it's an Alpha 1 is because it's a really high level navigation code. And this code is really only used in oceanic airspace. So if you're off the coast, either the East Coast or the West Coast in the US, and you're flying around out there, you're probably going to need to have RNAV 10 or RNP 10. Now, a lot of the GPSs that are installed in general aviation aircraft have this capability. However, you need to have a letter of authorization to operate with this code. So unless you've made friends with your local FSDO and have a letter of authorization on the airplane enabling you to fly RNAV 10, RNP 10, or the Alpha 1, do not put this code in there. It's very specific that you need to have a letter of authorization to use this. The next one is RNAV 5, and it's the Bravo code. Think of it as basic RNAV. So BRNAV, and that gives you the capability to fly point to point. So RNAV 5 plus or minus 5 miles off a desired flight path. And that's, say I wanted to fly from David Wayne Hooks Airport here northwest of Houston to, Jacksonville, Florida. RNAV 5 would get me there pretty easily and within that accuracy. That's what basic RNAV is for, and that's a minimum. You have to have that in Europe. You cannot really fly without the RNAV 5 or basic RNAV. RNAV 2, this is for flying on the airways based on RNAV waypoints. So you need to have this Charlie here. So Charlie code indicates RNAV 2. So this is for the T routes, the low altitude T routes and the Q routes. So you need to have this code if you're going to be flying on those airways. RNAV 1 or the Delta code. Now this is the real moneymaker for you out there. This indicates RNAV 1 capabilities because the tolerances need to be so much tighter when you're in the getting closer to the airport, flying on those SIDs and flying on those stars. So you need to have RNAV 1 capability. And if you try to file an RNAV SID or star without a Delta code in there, you will get a rejection from ATC. We see it every single day. So be sure that if you have RNAV 1, that you are using a Delta code in your PBN string. Like I said, the RNAV sources, this is just a list of them. I'm not going to really talk about them too much here, but the 1 is all permitted sensors. So that means you've got everything feeding into that capability. Most commonly for general aviation aircraft, the GPS or the 2 code is going to be what you're going to see. So this is just to show you what the numbers mean for the different codes after the letters. RNP, now this is, it's RNAV with the addition of onboard performance monitoring and alerting capabilities. So this is a higher level of RNAV. Not a lot of use for this for the GA community here in the US. I know that there is a departure out of Atlanta Hartsfield that requires RNP1. And I know that there's an arrival into Medford, Oregon that requires RNP1. Your aircraft may have this capability, and you may see it in the documentation from the manufacturer. But if you look at the SIDs and stars that require RNP, most of them are going to say authorization required. So unless you have specific authorization to fly that particular procedure, don't go filing that procedure and just plugging in this code thinking you're going to be okay, because you're really not. The RNP a lot of times is required for being able to fly a fixed radio around a point, like you're trying to get around a mountain or you're trying to avoid some sort of specific airspace. So you don't see a lot of RNP codes in the GA PBN strings here in the US. The last 2 codes at the bottom, the Sierra codes and the Tango codes, those are specifications for the type of approaches that the GPS unit is able to do through RNP. you can put them in there, but they're not going to give you any sort of special handling because, again, ATC does not assign approaches based on your PBN codes. So it's really not worth your while to put them in there. Some people have run into issues where they have so much equipment on the airplane and so much capability that they run out of space to put in their PBN codes, since the field only allows 8 indications of PBN. This is a pretty messy slide, and I apologize for that, but I took this from an FAA document, which I will share with you at the end of this webinar. I'll just kind of give you the bottom line on this. If, for example, you have RNAV 1 capability with all sensors, which would be a Bravo 1, then you do not need to put in Bravo 2, 3, 4, and 5 because the 1 covers everything. So what they basically are telling you is put in the most appropriate or the highest capable PBN code that's required for your particular flight. So sometimes you may have to juggle your PBN codes in and out depending on where you're going, but that is the guidance that we've gotten from the FAA. And again, I'm going to share this document in its form from the FAA with you at the end of this webinar. So hopefully you're still awake after all that. One question I have been asked on this is, if I have RNAV 1 capability, why do I have to indicate RNAV 2 and RNAV 5? Well, because they're not necessarily tied together. They are exclusive codes. So don't think that just because you have the Delta 1 that it also counts as the Bravo and the Charlie codes. It does not. Just if you have RNAV 1, RNAV 2, and RNAV 5 capabilities, put in the Delta, Charlie, and Bravo codes as appropriate. Let's get practical here and talk about the aircraft setup. So if we're going to set up our aircraft in ForeFlight, first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the Maps page. We'll select down at the More, down in the bottom right. And if you have one of the most latest versions of ForeFlight, this window will pop up. If you don't, please take a minute and download the latest version of ForeFlight. Here's where you'll select your aircraft. And for today's demonstration, I'm going to select this Skyhawk. Now, when I do this demonstration, I'm going to set it up for a very common GPS unit and transponder units. So I'm not going to be doing anything that's unusual or fancy. It's going to be something that you're going to see in most general aviation aircraft. So I'm going to go into the filing section of the aircraft profile, scroll down till you get past fuel into the filing area. Notice I don't have anything in the FAA equipment field. If you do, it's fine, but I'm not going to put anything in there because I'm not going to file in the NAS format. I'm just going to go with full ICAO. So I'm going to select the ICAO equipment line, and I'm just going to go from the top to the bottom. So I don't have a standalone DME in this airplane, so I'm not going to select that, nor do I have a standalone ADF. I do have GPS that is IFR approved and panel mounted, so I will select that. I'm going to skip the code for the ILS, and I'm going to skip the code for the VOR. I am going to select Romeo because my GPS does allow me to fly RNAV, so that means I am PBN approved. And then I'm going to select the Sierra. This is why I skipped the ILS and the VOR, because the Sierra code covers those two capabilities, plus my VHF radio. So that Sierra code covers all three of those. If I was going to be flying in Europe, I could go down there and select the Yankee code, but I'm not going to in this instance. So I'm just going to keep my equipment string simple. So I'm going to end up with a Golf, Romeo, and Sierra. The next line is my ICAO surveillance. And so I'm going to select that, and it's going to open up, and I'm going to see something like this. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select my transponder. So for this particular model, I have a mode S transponder with aircraft ID, altitude reporting, and a squitter. So I'm an Echo code here. And I have an ADSB with dedicated 1090 out only. And so I'll be a Bravo 1. So my ICAO surveillance codes are going to be Bravo 1 and Echo. The next line is where I get down into my PBNs. So for this airplane, I am RNAV 5 capable based on with that capability coming from a GPS unit. So I'll select that. I'll also select Charlie. Oh, I have my arrow in the wrong place. Charlie 2 for RNAV2 from a GPS source, and Delta 2 with RNAV1 from a GPS source. So my string in my PBN field will be Bravo 2, Charlie 2, and Delta 2. Really, that's pretty common. You're going to see that string in a lot of different airplanes. But be sure you check with your manufacturer to make sure you do have those capabilities in there before you should start plugging in codes. Because some of the older GPS units are RNAV 5 and 2, but not RNAV 1 capable. So you don't want to be filing that Delta code if you don't really have it. The other information field, a lot of people don't go in there and mess around because it is rather confusing. But I think there's two items that you want to have in there that are going to be really valuable for you. They're little tricks of the trade that are out there. And the two that I'm going to specifically talk about are code and SIR. So code is your assigned hexadecimal value that is found on the FAA registry. And it's uniquely associated with the registration value or N number, and it's always broadcasted out by ADSB. What does this do for you? Well, this will reduce the transponder code reassignments you get when you get handed off from one controller to another, because the ADSB is constantly transmitting out who you are. So they're not dependent on the radar sweep hitting your transponder with the correct code in there. That should save you a little bit of hassle, not necessarily time, but a little bit of hassle. And I like that. The SIR code that is in there, if you put in the code that is appropriate for the type of ADSB in there, you may be able to get a direct route through some areas of radar coverage if they know what type of ADSB you're transmitting on. So that could be a big time saver for you out there. And I think it's worth it just to put a code in my other information if I can have the possibility of getting a direct. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. So select the other information field and you're going to get this pop-up box. And the top field is going to be code. We're going to transition over to a website. We're going to go over to the FAA registry website, and we're going to plug in the registration of the aircraft here without the November, because this is only for November registered aircraft. So you don't have to drop the November in there. So if I was going to do it for November 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I would just type it in there like this. Now, I'm not going to pull up the data for that airplane. A friend of mine was actually kind enough to take a screenshot of his FAA registry page, and then he kind of marked it out with some sort of electronic Sharpie so that we couldn't see his name and address. But I want to show you where you're going to look on the FAA registry website to get your hexadecimal code. And it is right here. So when you pull this up for your airplane, you're going to be looking for the Mode S code base 16 hexadecimal code. And that code will start with the letter alpha, the A, and it will be a total of 6 characters long. So it'll be 6 numbers and letters starting with an A. So just take that code and copy it. Drop that code into the code field of the other information. Don't put any other information in there. Don't put hex code. Don't put the word code. Just the code beginning with the alpha. And just one thing that we've seen in the past is if you do this on ForeFlight Web, be sure that when you paste this code into the field on ForeFlight Web that you do not leave a space in front of the A. We've seen that a lot where it's dropped in, it actually looks correct to the user, and then when they go to file it, the code isn't lined up correctly in the filing, and it causes an error. So just make sure that alpha is tied up against the left-hand side when you put in the code. Next, we're going to scroll down this box to SIR for surveillance. And for this airplane, because I am a 1090 ADSB unit, I'm going to type in 260 Bravo. And that's all I need to do. Just put in 260 Bravo in this field. If you're a UAT aircraft, you're going to put in 282 Bravo. Both of them work. Both of them will provide the same type of advantages to ATC, but it just designates what frequency your ADSB is transmitting out on. So putting those two codes in the other information field, it could be a huge benefit for you when you're out there flying around. Again, it's just neither of these are mandated, but they're just little tricks of the trade we wanted to pass on to y'all. So when you're done with that, you'll see 2 items in your aircraft profile, and that's just all it's going to indicate is that you have two items in that other information field. So I know I've covered a lot. If there's still some confusion, we'll try to address it at the Q&A at the end. But if you're really confused or you just want some additional help, feel free to reach out to my team here at Flight Ops. We have no problem talking to you. We enjoy talking to our users and talking airplanes with them. My team is available. We are 24/7, 365 days a year. And you can reach us at team@foreflight.com. And we'll get back to you with some help on that. And if you're looking for something about a specific model of GPS or transponder, be sure to designate, I've got a blah, 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 blah type GPS unit with such and such there. Don't just, say I've got a Cessna 172. What are my codes? And we're like, I have no idea. You got to know what you've got installed. But we have this conversation a lot and we enjoy having it. So feel free to reach out to us. As I said earlier, I used a lot of different sources to get this information. If you would like an email with all the links that I used for this webinar, send an email to team@foreflight.com with the subject webinar link request. And I will have all of these links sent to you with the hyperlinks there. You can just click on them and go in there. There is a ton of information available about ICAO and the ICAO codes and how they work and why they work and so on and so forth here that it just would not be possible to cover in a webinar. So here are the links. So if you want that information, again, email to team@foreflight.com with the subject link or webinar link request, and we'll get that out to you quickly. Another place I would recommend is if you haven't been in there already, go to the ForeFlight Support Center. Here are some suggested searches in the ForeFlight Support Center. We spend a lot of time writing articles, doing research, trying to make things as clear and as easy to understand for our users as possible. So there is a ton of information, not only about ICAO, but about everything related to ForeFlight in the support center. So spend some time, dig around in there. If you have any questions, they probably are going to be addressed somewhere in the support center because we like to write things down so we don't have to answer the same question 20 times. But if you don't find what you need in there, again, contact us at team@foreflight.com and we'll be more than happy to help you out. So that's all I have for today. We're going to go into a time of Q&A after this. If you want to learn more about ForeFlight, do you want to watch other videos, here's some information there. And now we'll just move to Q&A. So thank you, everybody, for your time.
All right. Let's move on to some questions. We got a lot of great questions, and so I've got Rob here to answer a few of these. First up, is the Civil Air Patrol included in the FAA mandate, or are they considered military for filing? And this is referring to the requirement that everyone other than the military switch to using the ICAO flight plan form rather than the NAS form.
Yeah, so our understanding is that the Civil Air Patrol, in the eyes of the FAA on this, they're still filing as a general aviation. So they're not, they wouldn't be filing as an M flight type. So yeah, so they want you to be filing in the ICAO as well.
Right, yeah. Okay, next up, where may I get a printable form to use if I call flight service and file over the phone?
Yeah, so the links and also the ForeFlight Support Center will have, we have an ICAO quick reference guide that's pretty handy that you can print out. I think it maybe be a page or two long that you could print out and use when you're calling in a flight plan to flight service.
Yeah, and of course we also do, if you set up your flight plan within ForeFlight on the flights form, then you can actually export a pre-filled ICAO flight plan form if you're on the flights page within ForeFlight and you use the button in the top right, the send to button, and you tap the button that says share PDF, that actually gives you a pre-filled flight plan form. And so that would be convenient to read from. But of course, if you're building your flight plan in ForeFlight at all, we would certainly recommend that you just go ahead and file it with ForeFlight because it saves you a phone call, of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So next up, we've got this question. I thought that non-WAS installed GPS was not approved for IFR RNAV approaches. Is that correct, Rob?
WAS gives you an enhanced capability, so you can still file an LNAV approach. You're just not going to have the same capabilities as if you had a WAS equipped GPS, a WAS capable GPS. So if you have WAS, then you can include that Bravo code because you have the LPV capability, but you can still file RNAV approaches or fly the RNAV approach.
All right, next up. If you file /G, does that supersede /R?
So I guess I could answer that in two different ways. If you're filing /G, that's kind of the old NAS format, and that's not really what we're trying to cover here. But of course, you can have the G and the R in your ICAO equipment string. So I would just go with the ICAO on there.
What do you put if you don't have any of the ICAO equipment? I'm talking about a VFR aircraft without DME, VOR, RNAV, ILS, etc.
Oh, there is a specific code. I don't see it a lot. Just bear with me 1 second on that one. Yeah, I'll get. If you don't have anything, it's a November code, just like the, I wanted to say X, but I wanted to make sure I was right. It's a November code. So if you have no navigation, approach aid, or communication equipment, then you would select November in that field. Yeah, I neglected to mention if you don't have anything in there and you are filing ICAO, you still have to put something in the equipment string, and so you would put a November in there. So that was a great question.
All right, next one. Would you go over an example of an ICAO flight plan for crossing the US border through an ADIS outbound, and also an ICAO flight plan for crossing the ADIS back into the US? And I understand that we will actually be covering this in a future webinar at some point.
Yeah, we will. That's one of the benefits of the ICAO is that it's recognized by everybody in the world. It's the standard. So there's really not a lot of difference filing an ICAO flight plan. ForeFlight will format it for you with the estimated en route times to the different FIR boundaries, so that, say for example, you're going from Florida over to the Bahamas. It will calculate and indicate in your flight plan when you're leaving, say, Miami's airspace. So ForeFlight will take care of all that for you. Now, if this person was asking about VFR, that's a completely different kettle of fish, and we will talk about that when we have the VFR filing webinar in a couple of weeks, because there are some differences there on how you file that. But it should make no difference, because if you're filing in ICAO, ForeFlight will take care of it in there.
All right, next one. I've seen some recommendations to use SBAS. Is there a benefit to doing this?
Well, SBAS is, I mean, that's a higher capability that you have there, because you're getting more information from different sources. So SBAS, of course, you want to use every tool that you can based on what is installed in the airplane, but it's not going to affect your filing as far as equipment codes and stuff like that. So absolutely, you want to use everything you've got in the airplane. And I mean, if this particular person who asked a question wants to be a little more specific, have them shoot us an email to team at ForeFlight, and we'll get a conversation going on it.
Yeah, and that advice applies to any of the questions that are going to go unanswered during this. I can already see that there's a couple dozen, it looks like, that were submitted after we started Q&A, and so we're probably not going to get to all of those questions right now, but if any of you would like to have your question answered, just feel free to email team@foreflight.com, and we will definitely, Rob's team will get back to you on those. But we've got a few more to work through here before we close this out. So next up, is there a manufacturer list that identifies equipment for the ICAO codes? For example, a Garmin GTX 345 transponder is listed as S+B2, but Garmin did not give me the exact codes. And what about, for example, a GNS 530 WAS?
Yeah, so Garmin used to put out a really nice spreadsheet that you could download. It's kind of hard to find on the internet now. We actually have a copy in Flight Ops that we have on a shared drive, so I'd be happy to share that with the user. But I would say if you are interested and you do have some Garmin equipment in there, just do some searches on Garmin ICAO equipment codes, and you'd probably be able to find it. I think you do have to do some digging in their site, but it is out there, and it was really helpful, I thought. It's what I used when I first started figuring out a lot of different pieces of equipment for the airplanes. I would use that Garmin sheet, but I'd be happy to share it with the person who asked that question, or if anybody does.
All right, next up, this is, I assume the answer to this one will be pretty similar to the last one, but how do you work out your codes if the equipment went in before the switch to ICAO came along? So for example, dual 430 WAS with full approval for LPV and RNAV navigation.
Right, so the 430 is extremely popular. It's a great unit. The 430 is RNAV 5, 2, and 1 capable. So you would probably have codes of your PBN codes of the Bravo 2, Charlie 2, and Delta 2. You would certainly have a G for GPS and R for your PBN. And if you're WAS, which would be the 430W LPV, you would have a Bravo code in there. But again, you can find some of that information either through the manufacturers, or if you can find that Garmin spreadsheet, or reach out to us and we'll help you.
Great. All right. I think we'll go ahead and make this the last question. Is it appropriate to add search and rescue contact info in the N block? Contact name and phone number, destination, contact info, etc.
So I know in ForeFlight we have those fields for destination contact. Yeah, you can absolutely put them in there. We've used it when ATC has called us up saying they've got an airplane that's been overdue, or Nordo, on no radio condition. That information is available to us. So is it appropriate? Absolutely. But again, that's not something that the controllers are going to have immediately at their fingertips when they're talking to you, but it is stored in ForeFlight.
All right. Perfect. Thanks, Rob. And once again, like I said before, if any of you haven't had your questions answered and are really looking for an answer, please email them to team@foreflight.com. Just, scroll up in that little question panel on the right, copy the question. Heck, you could take a screenshot of it if you wanted to and just send that in. We want to make sure that we're answering all of your questions. And because we can't do that right now live, we can certainly do that over email. And we can probably do a better job of it over email because we can give you a more thorough answer if you need it. So please don't settle for not knowing the answer to whatever question you have. Just contact us and Rob's team will get back to you quickly. That same goes if you needed to get access to any of those links that he shared earlier in the presentation. You can just email in and we can point you to all of the resources you'll need to figure out all of these issues with the ICAO codes. So thanks again, everyone. There is a very quick survey that will pop up right when I click end webinar here. And so if you wouldn't mind just filling that out real quick, it just lets us know how we're doing, and it allows you to give us some ideas about webinars we could be doing in the future. But thanks again, and we'll see you on the next webinar.